Hi, Tommy Aldridge here. You guys are watching Drumming News Network. Everything you could ever want to know about drumming is on Drumming News Network. Watch it. Bless you.
Rock legend Tommy Aldridge is one of the most influential drummers in hard rock and heavy metal history. A self-taught powerhouse and a true pioneer of double bass drumming, Tommy first made his mark with Black Oak, Arkansas before going on to perform with some of rock's biggest names, including Ozzy Osbourne, Whitesnake, Gary Moore, Pat Travers, Thin Lizzy, and Ted Nugent. After more than 5 decades behind the kit, he continues to inspire drummers around the world with his incredible passion, energy, and unmistakable style. Fresh off a series of Yamaha drum clinics, Tommy joins us to talk about what he's sharing with drummers today. We dive into his approach to soloing, his work with Yamaha developing the incredible carbon fiber Whitesnake drum set, what he's currently practicing, how he maintains his legendary energy behind the drums, and the launch of his brand new website. Along the way, Tommy shares a wealth of wisdom, practical advice, and unforgettable stories that drummers of every age and experience level can learn from. This is a conversation you will not want to miss. Let's get started. Tommy, thank you so much for making the time to talk with me tonight about this exciting news about you doing clinics with Yamaha.
Thank you for having me, Paul. And again, I apologize for all the drama with Zoom, which is a completely totally useless app. I don't know how they ever got any traction. It really wasn't a tour. It was 4 clinics, but be that when I hear tour, I think well, it's going to be 6 or 8 months, but it was only 4 clinics. But yeah.
You did one at Sweetwater at the beginning of the last year, wasn't it?
Well, it wasn't. Well, it wasn't a clinic at Sweetwater. I went out and spent I was there 4 days there. I did a riff challenge with Billy Sheehan and Phil Dimmel on one day, and they videoed that. And then the next day, I just did a performance, where you play through, for I think it was 45 minutes, because they have several drummers. I think it was a drum festival, they call it. They do it couple of times a year or once a year, I think. Yeah, there were 5 or 6 drummers on it, and yeah, so it's one guy after another, an hour break or so, and then the next guy comes up. Yeah, I did that. Yeah, and then it was down in Florida. We doing some Yamaha clinics through some guitar centers down in Florida toward the end of last year, first of this year. Yeah.
Is there any chance that you'll be expanding the drum clinics to other parts of the country?
It's entirely up to Yamaha. I mean, I've always done clinics, but it's usually when I'm not touring or something, I'll come in and take a couple of weeks off, and I'll go out, and hit a couple of weeks worth of clinics here and there, and I've done them in Europe, and I've done them in Shanghai, to North Korea, all over the place. But it's pretty much up to Yamaha. They use it. It's kind of a promotional outreach for those guys, and for their dealer networks and things like that. But they're a little stressful. I enjoy doing them, but they're a little stressful, because you can't hide behind any of the other band members, and stuff like that, and you don't have all the bells and whistles, all the resources available to be the bigger than life thing with the lights and all that. We have a different kit most every day. It's quite a bit of work,
Okay.
I don't have my tech with me, so if he's not there, then I'm the only one there. Even though there are a lot of people to help, I'm the only one there that knows how I can set my kit up. I mean,
Right.
If you were a drummer, I could set your kit up, but I would set it up the way I would play it.
Right.
So it gets a little overwhelming, with all the background work that has to happen. Then you have a PA guy, a sound guy that comes in sort of at the last minute, But I enjoy doing them. They're just kind of a little bit stressful. And then you have a room full of a lot of drummers, and they want to see and hear usually things that they can't play, see or hear, So especially in the YouTube age that we're living in, when you see guys on there defying the fundamental laws of the universe behind a drum kit, one after another. So they're a little bit more daunting than they used to be.
Yeah. What would people expect to see from you in a typical clinic?
I don't know what they would expect, but I can tell you what I do.
Okay.
They probably expect a lot more than I end up delivering. Excuse my skepticism. I try to, the drums are first and foremost an instrument of accompaniment. So there goes my wife. I try to play, a half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour or so of music from different groups that I have trouble holding down a job. So I've played with a lot of different musical ensembles throughout my career, some of them pretty famous. Um,
Mhm.
and I try to take stuff from those different eras or different, groups and try to represent those careers in my chapters in my career, throughout. And I do a bit of soloing, and then I invite some question and answers, some question and a Q&A set, and pretty much let those guys, kind of lead the narrative or guide the narrative, and then you find out pretty quick what they want to know about and stuff. And I get a lot of questions that are of course related to drums and drumming, but I get a lot of related to, the personal, some of the personal, um, uh, uh, circumstances, with different people and things, was it like working with, different people, and, what was the craziest gig you ever did? So I just let the room kind of read itself, and I try to
Okay.
you from them and try to keep it interesting and personable. I don't do them, to inspire. I don't know that I'm really capable of producing anything on the drums that would be particularly inspiring, as much as I try to encourage, up and coming drummers, especially in this age with YouTube and stuff. And like I mentioned, you see so many people in there, one after another, defying the fundamental laws of the universe, gravity being one of them, the speed of sound, the speed of light, and so forth and so on. And so it could get, for a young drummer, it can get pretty demoralizing, saying, well, I don't know if I can do that. Know that none of them realize that some of that stuff is done after 2 or 3 weeks of very tedious, professional AI editing and so forth and so on. Um, and a lot of it is not in very much of a musical context. A lot of it is just so fast, and again, so incredibly impressive. And I try to encourage, young and up and coming drummers, that you don't have to be able to play a blast beat at 250 BPM, or, have the flow of a Larnell Lewis or a Dave Weckl, to be, to have a successful career, behind our instrument. And so I'm all over that. I'm really happy to go out and try to share some of that stuff, because I know when I was a kid coming up and I was destroying my mom's records and, moving the needle and trying to figure out how to play, take 5 and 5/4, and stuff like that. Some of the resources that people have today, I don't want to shade any of that, because the more information we have, the better we are at expressing whatever God's put on our heart to say, but uh, it can be pretty demoralizing, I should imagine, for an up and coming kid, trying to figure out. And there's so much information on there, sometimes too much is worse than not enough. So
Mhm.
I don't know if I should have be an envy of the guys that have access to all the information that's on there that I didn't get, but I'm not so quick to do that. But I kind of let the crowd, read the room, and whatever they want, that's what we do.
People get so excited about seeing you play, just you as a player, because you bring so much of your body, your soul into your playing. How did you develop that over the years?
Well, I was growing up, and I kind of self-taught. Well, absolutely self-taught. I don't say it boastfully. It was kind of the mother of that invention. There wasn't
Mhm.
really a drum teacher. I wanted to go. And in hindsight, I would, have few regrets there. I should have done a couple of years of drum corps, got the fundamentals rudimentally, left, right, and all that. And that's really, it's imperative. It's the language of our instrument. So consequently, there's some holes in my playing, and I've spent a fair amount of time spending more of that time that I maybe should have been in drum corps, trying to find ways to accent my strengths and minimize my weaknesses.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, I wish I'd have spent more time there, but I would go in my drum room after, I mean, it was a long, I started pretty young, but just going in and trying to apply the rudiments that I had learned on the kit, and doing it kind of in a homespun way. There wasn't a curriculum in my program because being self-taught, I learned the easier rudiments, what I felt were easier first, and so forth. And I know there's a chronology to them, and there's a very specific learning curve and stuff that's addressed with the curriculum that a school teacher does. And so I try to encourage that with younger players, to get a good grip on the fundamentals. But not having done that myself, I'd go in my drum room and try to come out with something behind the kit that I hadn't heard anyone play before, and listening to records and the radio and stuff, and that was my goal. And in doing that, I kind of learned a way to play that was maybe a little bit unorthodox. I've been told that, and some of the things that were birthed from my self-teaching and self-teaching situation that maybe were some of that was responsible in the silly things that I ended up coming up with. But I would just take the rudiments and then try to apply them to a kit in a way that I thought that the rudiments were made for your hands. So when I started messing around with two bass drums, it was way before it became uh, popular. I would do the same thing with my feet that I learned to do with my hands, because I figured if the rudiments teach you in the right-left independence, that would be a good thing to know on your feet as well. And so that's when I borrowed a friend's bass drum and put it on my kit and just started messing around. Most of them were exercise. There were no musical context or anything. It was just a way for me to occupy my mind and my time in my little rehearsal room. And it just kind of, as I did that, and I realized that some of the things that I'd normally be playing with my left hand, I could cover with my left foot. And so the first thing I learned to do with a pair of sticks was twirl. And so that came in handy when I could spend less time with this hand hitting the drum and covering that note with my left foot. It would give me a chance to twirl and make a real fool of myself. So then I started kind of trying to concentrate a little bit on that aspect, the physical and the video aspect of our instrument, because of the freedom that having two bass drums allowed me. And it just kind of morphed into that. Again, I wasn't trying to be all show and no go. It just seemed, well, as a playing in high school dances and things, and junior high school dances in these small rooms, and then as the room got bigger, I needed to play louder, and I thought that I needed to be more demonstrative at the same time. So one kind of begat the other, so to speak. And then when the rooms got bigger and I got into more professional bands and around more real musicians and being encouraged by them and the audience and stuff. And as you grow up like that, it's a little bit different than growing up on YouTube or something, because you have the one-on-one, and the room would get bigger and I would try to focus on somebody playing back and see if I could get their attention, and,
Okay.
and as the venues got bigger, my motions got bigger. And I started, instead of playing this close to the drum, I started playing, and just trying to, be a ham, and just give somebody something to hear, to see as well as hear. And I saw how it would bring people in, and people would respond. And so it just kind of encouraged me in that. And so again, as the venues got bigger, so did my moves, and it was just, it wasn't anything that was really, it wasn't premeditated, or something. I'm going to be a huge showman or anything like that. It just seemed like my learning curve was gradual, thankfully, and the influences I had were pretty minimal, and so it was kind of a clean slate. I saw Keith Moon when I was young, and he was kicking drums over and stuff like that. I didn't want to do that because I love my drums, I wanted to kick my drums ass, but I didn't want to actually throw my drums all over the place, And so it was just like that. And it's like kind of like theater actors and actresses, their movements, because it's live and they don't have a camera that comes in and they can act to, and the audience is farther away. There are really no microphones to speak of. And so their moves are overly demonstrative, their voices are louder. And it was just giving a visual punctuation to the audio and playing to the people in the nosebleed section. And that's kind of what I've tried to do. And again, it wasn't really premeditated or anything. It just kind of happened.
How do you go from two inspirations that you cited, from Joe Morello and Dave Brubeck quartet, to double bass? I mean, it's such an extreme.
That's a good question. Well, that was the music that inspired me. That's the music that I heard in my home. My mom played the music in the house, and the first tune that I heard was that really I was enamored by the drums in it. I didn't realize that it was an odd time signature. I mean, at that young age, I didn't even know drums were a timekeeping instrument. I thought it was all this shiny stuff that you could go ballistic on. Like every young kid does, boy or girl.
Hmm.
Thing. I was a fan of Joe Morello. I was greatly inspired by Joe Morello, though I don't play anything like him. I never had those capacities. His capabilities far exceeded just naturally. And he was in a jazz context. I was more accommodated by, uh, uh, more contemporary music, rock music and so forth and so on. Hendrix, uh, Cream, Led Zeppelin stuff. Those are the music. Those are the bands that kind of formed my musical sensitivities or musical preferences. And because what with Brubeck and with Take Five, I mean, there were Blue All Turk on that record, which is in 13. I remember working up to Take Five, and it took me like 3 weeks just to get the drum part in my head, and then I had to figure out a way to actually perform it on the kit. It took me months to be able to play it. And then all of a sudden the Beatles hit, and I could learn a Beatles record in 2 days, the whole record,
Yeah.
So, and I liked that music. I was attracted to that music.
Hmm.
That was the music that accommodated me emotionally and age wise and everything else. And that's what I gravitated toward. So I play very little jazz. I love listening to jazz, and I love some of my favorite drummers are jazz drummers, but I don't articulate it well. And even though that's who inspired me, and I met him on a couple of occasions, and thanked him for the inspiration. And he said he had just heard me play at a Modern Drummer Festival was when I met him on the East Coast. And afterwards he said, "Thank you for the compliment, but you don't play anything like me." That's what Joe Morello told me. And I said, "Yes, I know, but I was nevertheless greatly inspired by him." And he was actually the first drummer to play drums with his hands, but I never saw him do that. Well, the
Okay.
first was recorded. Of course, John Bonham was the guy that globally got the tag, because he was the most well-known contemporary drummer to do it and got the most attention doing it. But I was doing that in my drum room, so my dad wouldn't hear my drums. I cover them with towels, and I hadn't even heard. I don't even know if the footage of Morello playing on this kit with his bare hands was even available at that time.
Well, what other jazz drummers do you cite as inspirations to you, or who do you like to listen to?
Well, Louis Bellson, Gene Krupa. I mean, those are really well. Krupa was a big band drummer. I don't know if that was, and of course, Buddy Rich. You would have to be, not even a drummer, not to be, where his just ridiculously, exquisitely perfect and pure technique. Buddy Rich's sheer technique brought his kit to the front of the stage. He didn't need to do anything else. But Gene Krupa was a lot more visual, but and brought those aspects into the playing, where Buddy Rich's his sheer technique was show enough,
Hmm.
and his attitude. But today's standards, there's so many I mean, and I don't consider Larnell Lewis a pure jazz drummer, and Dave Weckl, is he a jazz drummer? I don't know. Maybe, I think, yeah. And those guys are, I hear them, I listen to those guys, and they just humble me beyond redemption. They really do, with the flow and everything. They're just real drummers, and because the genre of music that I occupy is so much more fundamental. It has some aspects in it. You're never going to hear Buddy Rich play a John Bonham groove. I'm sure he probably could have played one, but I very doubt. I know for a fact he wouldn't have wanted to, because it was a rock vibe. And you'd never hear Buddy Rich. I mean, John Bonham, play much Buddy Rich stuff, and they're not mutually exclusive from a drumming perspective, because there are guys on the planet that can play pretty much anything, but really owning those different genres, that's another story. I mean, I can sit down and play a Latin, or a samba, but it doesn't sound anything like that when Alex Acuna plays a samba.
Right.
He would laugh. But there's a few things that I do that people may find humorous if he tried to do it. So I mean, what my aspirations and my ambitions predicate what I do musically. Thankfully, I came up when the music was a lot less populated. I was able to find a niche for me and a genre for me that I was able to fit in. Even though I was in a number of different bands, they were all quite popular and had their own following, even though it's the same genre of music. Consequently, maybe I was able to, I don't know, slip under, get my foot in the door before the door got ever closer to closing, you know. Like in today's terms, an analogy would be the guitar hero. You don't hear about guitar heroes anymore.
Right.
You know, there's incredible guitar players out there because the landscape has just changed so much, you know. And you hear some guys playing on YouTube, guitar guys that are just, again, they're doing the same thing on the guitar that so many drummers are doing on my instrument, but you don't hear about the guitar heroes. You know,
Right.
Eric Clapton's. Eric Clapton, he's known as Slow Hand Luke, but Eric Clapton he was, you know, with Cream and all that stuff. There was a thing going on then where it was a collaborative aspect. Even with John Bonham, as skilled as John Bonham was, it was a collaborative effort between himself and Jimmy Page and John Paul Jones and Robert Plant, where the whole became so much greater than the individuals, even in spite of the incredible talent of each individual in that band. Same holds true for, you know, Hendrix, you know, when Mitch Mitchell was on drums, a big band drummer. Mitch Mitchell was essentially a big band drummer, real life player playing an orthodox script, but he hooked up with this black guy from Mars, man, and then Noel Redding on bass, made for something that was so much greater than the individual components. Another idea of that now, I mean, example of that would be the Police with Stuart Copeland, you know, as a ska guy, a real 1-3 guy, kind of a reggae kind of feel. And it's those sensibilities of his that really made Police, even though it was like Sting was really pop singer and pop, you know, real pop aesthetic in the compositionally, but with that not weird, but that unusual 1-3 thing that Copeland was playing, and then what, you know, what Andy was playing on the guitar, that kind of ethereal thing going through it was new. It was
Right.
different. You put those two almost contradicting elements together in one band, and all of a sudden you have the Police. So, and those are bigger than any YouTube event because it's of one guy, or, you know, because it's a cultural thing, and people all of a sudden, oh, well, that was the wet song at my that I heard on my honeymoon. Or you understand, it's a completely different that way of, excuse me, navigating through today's musical landscape. And it's ever more challenging, even though there are resources that allow people to learn things they would just otherwise wouldn't have access to. You go on Drumeo, man, you can sit behind a guy, and not only can you hear and see everything he's playing, they'll slow it down for you, you know? And there's that I don't care how good a drummer you are, if a guy's playing some stuff at full speed, it's really sometimes tough to understand what's going on. I remember Steve Smith said to me, asked me why, and Steve Smith can play circles above me. They stand behind me at a Journey show. They were closing, we were supporting them, and he said, "That thing you're doing, are you doing what, 2 hits on the right bass drum and 1 on the left? Or are you doing right, left, right, and then the snare?" I'm saying, "I'm going right, left, right, and the snare," but he wasn't sure until he asked, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Smith knows everything. You know? He knows everything. And so that just goes to show you that there's so much more about going on with the collective of a band. And that's kind of the atmosphere and that I grew up in. And so it shaped me and formed me. And got to find myself into a company of musicians, guitar players primarily, but musicians that really lifted me up to their level of play. And I learned so much from them. So you've got jazz drummers, and then you have rock drummers, and then you have Latin drummers, and you have ska drummers. But if you have a musician, it covers all those things, you know, and that's the part that in the element in my upbringing, musically, it forms so much what I do. The guitar player would come out with a riff, and I'm thinking, what am I going to play there? And I wouldn't always know until I got behind the kit and messed around with some stuff. And it's kind of reverse engineering. And I learned from it, because in order to play the song, I need to find something that's the best thing, the most appropriate thing. So that really drove my learning, you know, rather than having a huge toolbox and going, oh, well, this tool that I learned in the drum corps 15 years ago, I'm going to pull that out, you know, and bada boom. And so even though my way is kind of backwards engineering, and there's some elements in my playing that people have told me is kind of off the wall and different, and in some ways describe it almost as an attribute. I don't see it that way, but some others have described it that way to me. So, I'll take that. I don't take any credit except for the bad notes anyway. All the credit for the good stuff I give to the man upstairs, for the
Mhm.
blessing of creativity, because that's where it comes from. I don't take any credit for that, but just try to be in a responsive position to get the download, all
Mhm.
is that I share it, So I've been traveling all over the world trying to share the information that he's begotten me. I don't know if I answered your question.
Well, yeah, you did, because I just love hearing your inspirations. What gets you excited about drumming? I guess one of the questions leading into that is, what keeps you interested in drumming today? After all these years of playing, and is there anything that you're trying to learn new that you haven't done yet?
Well, I sit in my drum room. I do a lot of cycling, bicycling. It keeps me fit, and it's kind of my second love. And it helps me when I'm drumming. I don't really get when I'm fit on my bike. I'm always fit on the kit. Um, um, I'll go in my drum room. I broke my wrist. I got knocked off a bike, and I broke my wrist in my right femur. And breaking your wrist right in the joint is a really challenging injury for a drummer. So these days I spend hours and hours still, on and reverting back to stick control. And that was a book that I studied when I was first coming up on my practice pad and stuff. But as I got busier and busier and started actually playing and trying to feed myself and going out on tours and stuff, it kind of fell off to the wayside because I was out busy trying to earn a living.
Hmm.
And I'm not blaming anything. It was just I was too busy and that's some of the holes in my playing that I never patched up because you can't fake any of that stuff. Stick
Right.
control is invaluable. And so trying to rehab my wrist, I went back to that and I thought, oh man. And so I'm spending a lot more time in my drum room trying to implement some of the rudimental stuff that I learned early on in my drumming when I went to two bass drums and started applying a lot of the rudiment stuff to my feet and trying to do like a bar of 16. My style has almost always been based on a linear approach because of the amount of notes that I've covered on my feet and trying to fill in a bar of 16. I would do three hits on the top and do five on the bottom and then two on the top and then I'd finish out the bar of 16 with my feet. Consequently, my feet have gotten really, really sharp, but the downside is my multi-strokes on my hand suffered because I was covering those notes on my feet with single
Oh,
strokes. Yeah.
okay.
So I'm trying to integrate more of that into my playing without it showing too much. I'm not going to go full molar on anybody. It's too late for that. So don't worry about that. I don't have the capacity or the facility anyway, but just trying to implement a few more hand strokes, double strokes and things like that, compound rhythm stuff instead of splitting it between my left hand and my right foot and my right hand and left foot, splitting it between the hands first, with, the second part of the root of the paradiddle, trying
Hmm.
to play on a few more diddles up top and things like that. Yeah. But that's what I spend a good portion of my time on these days in my drum room, going and experimenting with things that I didn't follow through with when I was young coming up and trying to bring those to fruition in a way that I can implement into my little bag of, tools into my tool bag. Yeah.
Okay, well, let's talk about your drum solo too, because when you're talking about equal beats and all that kind of stuff, it makes me think of your drum solo, which has kind of maintained somewhat the same structure throughout your career, but it's morphed throughout the decades.
Yes.
So putting, like in your original video, double bass drumming and soloing,
Mm-hmm.
which I love, you talk a lot about structuring and creating the format of a drum solo.
Mm-hmm.
If people are wanting to put together a drum solo now, what goes through your mind about when you want to create your drum solo?
That's a very good question, and I have to say that redundancy is really hard to avoid when you find things that work. Like Shannon Larkin mentioned something the other day. He was talking to somebody online. I can't remember who it was, and he's been doing the Godsmack thing for a long time. He stepped away from it, and if you go in the thing that he and Sully did together, it was a duet because For some reason, Shannon thinks he says he's not a soloist, so he's comfortable doing a duet, and that's some pretty much maintained. That's such a part of who those guys, what those guys do. It's remained a thumbprint. It's a thumbprint. So when people go to a Godsmack show, they expect that. And I would be really every John Bonham solo that have you go through and pick through all of them that you can find online. There
Hmm.
aren't that many because he passed so early in his career. Just think how maybe think it would be a little bit more redundancy had he lived to 75 years old. I hear a lot of guys, or some guys, some very famous drummers, which shall remain nameless, that will play a solo and then turn around and play a solo on a different sounding electronic kit or triggers, and I'll hear the same patterns. I'll hear
Hmm.
essentially the same thing, just played with a different sound source. Um, and every solo that I ever heard Buddy Rich play, with very few exceptions, had almost the same elements in it. He would rearrange them. He would put them in different places. But if I hear Buddy Rich, I want to hear Buddy Rich. When I hear Larnell Lewis play, I mean, Larnell Lewis has such texture and such dichotomy in the parts that he chooses and the styles that he has in his, it's crazy. But every time I've heard Larnell play, he always plays elements of the things that I love about Larnell Lewis. I'm
Okay.
not saying that I've heard everything he's capable of playing, but one of the things about living in a genre of music that is pretty fundamental and having soloed for so many years, it's really tough for me to go in and find something that hits people the way I want to hit them, that changes too far from things that I've found in the past because they expect me to do certain things. I'm not saying that I should go out and do exactly the same thing every time I play. Who wants to be stunted, you know?
Hmm.
I agree, and some of the aspects of being self-taught that you learn only the things that you like, that you learn only the things that you want to learn. That's why in clinic situations and any conversations that I'd have is to learn things that other people want you to learn things that you don't enjoy learning. Because if I go in my room, my rehearsal room, if I don't make any mistakes, then I'm not learning anything, you know.
Hmm.
I've sat outside and sometimes when I'm like the band's out rehearsing or someplace and I'll hear someone. I remember at Mace, there's a rehearsal hall room in Mace, and um, Pat Torpey's a good friend of mine. Drummer with
Okay.
Big, who passed so early in his career, so unfairly, had so much more to say than anyone ever had, than he ever had the opportunity to say or people had to hear. I'd come in mates to rehearse, and he would be in a rehearsing on his own, and he would play a double paradiddle for 30 minutes.
Okay.
I would leave and go grab a sandwich and come back. He would still be playing a double paradiddle. This is the kind of stuff. That's what I mean. There's no shortcut. And
Hmm.
I hear him say it sounded like somebody was throwing a drum kit down a staircase for 30 minutes. Him trying to learn something and play something. Obviously, it wasn't settled, but he wasn't afraid to take the chance and make the mistakes because he didn't care who was out there listening, you know. It wasn't
Hmm.
about that. And so if you have that attitude and that mentality, man, that's how you get to be drummers like Pat Torpey is and was, you know. And again, what he was doing in that context, in that musical context, and this is no disrespect to Mr. Big, was a tip of the iceberg to what he was capable of, you know. And so, but when Pat Torpey would go out and play Mr. Big, they had expectations of who Pat Torpey was and what his position was in that. So he couldn't go out and blow, something in a 7/8 or 9 or 13, and that's not what who. It's like people coming to get to taste your chocolate cake, and you try to give them a peach pie, so to speak. So their expectations, I don't. If I had a dime for every time I've heard the phrase, "God, if I have to play this song one more time, I'm going to explode." Well, you have to play the song one more time, or it's going to explode because that's why people are there to see you. So
Right.
it depends on how big a purist you are, but I strive to be more dimensional, within the context of what I'm known for. I don't get a lot of calls for brush work. I don't know why that is. I don't get a lot of calls for brush work. Well, I don't
Hmm.
of the brushwork because that's not been a part of my career and a part of my playing that people have that used to express what I'm trying to, whatever God's put on my heart that I'm trying to express. So there's some aspects of that opinion or that argument that is really valid. And then on the other hand, you have to be who you are. You can't try to be something you're not. And the things that I've learned throughout my career have really put me in a place that I wouldn't otherwise have been able to achieve, mostly through the associations that I've had, like-minded thinkers musically, guitar players, singers, band players, and all the different bandmates that I've had throughout my career that have shaped the way that I do. But those are the things that I try to work on in my drum room, some way that I can do something that's equally appreciated without it being something that someone's heard before, because again, that was my goal when I was coming up, when I was practicing on my own, to go in my drum room with nothing and come out with something that I hadn't played before. Being the oldest instrument on the planet, it's really tough to distinguish yourself behind the drums these days, and to have your own voice. And it's only a handful of people that have been able to pull that off. And if you look at John Bonham, I think he really personifies that because he had an economy in his style. He wasn't one of these guys with a lot of notes in his playing. But he played exactly the right thing, and he played it with an economy of notes that was so creative and so moving, not just to professional drummers, but to lay people. I mean, listen to any of his drum parts. They're not very notey. They're not busy parts. So most of his part, his right foot was was his calling card when he first came out. Good times, bad times, and that. But he was only doing 2 notes at a time on that. They were incredibly faster than anyone else had been doing them. But in today's standards, but every John Bonham solo that I ever heard always had the same elements in it. And with the greatest respect to all the Rush fans out there, because I did hundreds of shows supporting or on the same stage with Rush when I was coming up throughout my career. Neil and I and Geddy and Alex, we go way back from different tours and stuff. When I was with Travers, when I was with Black Oak, they supported us when I was with Black Oak, when they were just coming up, even pre-Taurus pedals, before Geddy was even playing Taurus pedals and stuff. But yeah. I heard when I go to hear Neil, there's certain elements in Neil's playing that I always heard whenever I'd hear Neil solo. He would turn around and he'd play the same thing on another different sounding instrument, but all those elements were always in there, every solo that I ever heard him play. Mm-hmm. And so there's something to be said for your calling card, and there's also something to be said for having an endless supply of hits. And I haven't met anyone yet that has an endless supply of hits.
You've been with Yamaha for so many years, but you also became kind of a product tester developer, including the carbon fiber drum set and the newer line of set that was released in the early 2000s. I can't remember what that was. How did working with Yamaha come about with developing the carbon fiber drum set, and why was that kind of like a one-off only? They didn't release anymore.
Yeah, I was touring with the Tubes, I was with Pat Travers when we were touring with the Tubes at the time. But I was still a Sonar guy. I started my first endorsement, Sonar drums, and I was Zildjian cymbals, and I was with them for a few years. But it had nothing to do with drums. But Prairie Prince was a drummer with the Tubes, and he was early Yamaha cat. And I heard his drums every night out front. And I said, "Whoa, man, they sound so crazy good." And that's what prompted me. And I was having some issues, not with the Sonar drums, but with the distributor in America. Because when I started with Sonar, I was dealing directly with the factory, with Horst-Link, who was his son Oliver runs Sonar now. And I was dealing directly with the factory. Well, in the interim, a distributor, Hohner, was the worldwide distributor for Sonar, and Hohner hired a distributor out of Boston who shall remain nameless, and it made it impossible for me to get drum parts, spares. That's why I left. But I was so enamored with the Yamaha sound. So yeah, I approached them actually, and they didn't know me from Adam's House Cat, because over here at that point, most of the Yamaha guys were jazz guys, Weck, I think Weck was playing them, and Vinny Colaiuta, and they were, really heavy hitter jazz cats, and they didn't know me from Adam's House Cat. But somebody, I can't remember who it was, that kind of put my name in a hat. And he said, yeah, we'll give it a shot, you know. And at about the same time, Cozy was hooking up with him. Cozy Powell was a big Yamaha guy about the same time, but he was in Yamaha UK. And they
Mhm.
were a lot less steeped in the jazz thing, you know. Anyway, I started with them, and yeah, it's been a it's been a wonderful relationship, and I've been with them for the lion's share of my career. And they're so responsive to what, you know, when they ask you something, they implement it and things like that. And the carbon kit came about. I lived in Dallas at the time, and I had a friend that had an association, not directly, but indirectly with General Dynamics, and General Dynamics made the F-16s, you know, there in Texas. And he had, I had this idea about making a carbon fiber drum shell. I'm a real bicycle fanatic. I ride bicycles a lot as I can, and carbon is a real popular material for bicycle frames. And it was just coming, it was just starting then, you know. And I figured, well, if I can make a small bicycle tube out of carbon fiber. And mind you, at that time, most of the carbon fiber was NASA or aerospace industry. It was just really expensive, you know. But
Mhm.
things I'd heard from my friend, it might be a good material, I thought, because a lot of the metal snare drums were having the same kind of attributes with carbon, except I thought, well, that might be a good material for a snare drum, you know. So I got a friend indirectly to get just a round tube, which is what a snare drum is, you know, 14 inches. And I did the bearing edge on it as best I could because I didn't understand about bearing edge. It was just a 40, it was just a square edge. And messed around with it, but it wasn't successful because trying to drill through carbon and stuff. And anyway, when I got as time went by and years went by with Yamaha, and I did a lot of stuff for them, you know, testing stuff, and they would send prototypes and stuff. And I just asked Hoggy, I said, Hoggy, is it possible? He was the oversaw the drum division. He started Yamaha drums, responsible for the recording custom, all the original Yamaha drums that put Yamaha on the map and made everybody want their drums to this very day. He's no longer with him. He aged out, but he said, "Oh, Tommy-san, yeah, we make snare drum." So they were going to just make the snare drum out of carbon. And I said, "Well, can you make the whole kit out of carbon?" He said, "Oh, Tommy-san, let me check." Well, you see, Yamaha is owned by Nippon Gaki, which is one of the world's largest, you know, conglomerates. I mean, there's
Mhm.
Yamaha in Japan. I mean, everything is Yamaha, comes out with a Yamaha. Even the kids are born have a Yamaha logo on them. You know, it's crazy. Golf carts, tennis racket frames, golf club shafts, motorcycles, you know, you name it, jet skis, everything. And
Mhm.
in Japan, even more. They have a composites division. And so Hoggy said, let me do some checking. So we went to the composite division, and the composite division makes carbon fiber tennis racket frames and boat racing shells, sailboat racing shells, and so things like that. So he said he went to them and they said, yeah, we can do that.
Okay.
Well, they're essentially just tubes, you know, very big tubes, but and that have to, and so they made a carbon kit and they sent it to me. And I was in Reno rehearsing for a new Whitesnake record, and I was hoping to get them before we started recording. And they came in, they were shipped to Reno, Nevada, where we were rehearsing and going to record, like 2 or 3 days before we started recording. So it was like Christmas. So they flew them in and I used them on the Slip of the Tongue album. That's the first time I'd used them on the Slip of the Tongue album. That's the first, and that was the first kit that they had ever made. Hoggy did make me another set of bass drums, two more bass drums, because he wasn't happy with the inside finish. They didn't sound any different, and I was completely happy with them. But I have four of the bass drums. But that was there was one small prototype kit that they made just before they made those. That
Mhm.
are in the Hamamatsu museum, where the Hamamatsu factory is. That's where all the PHX kits are made now. But that prototype kit is in the showroom in Hamamatsu. But to my understanding, I have the only carbon fiber kit, you know, that a kit that there's. They did make some prototype snare drums that they were going to try to maybe make a signature snare drum out of, but the cost was prohibitive, so that never really came about. So
Okay.
there are some snare drums about, but I think probably all of them are in Japan, or and so astronomically priced. Nobody would, you know, would really be want to hit it with a drumstick. You know, they're so expensive.
Well, the thing is, the carbon fiber has now dropped significantly in price, as you've talked about. At that time, it was really difficult, but now it's become more common. Is there any chance that they would look revisit the idea of having a Tommy Aldridge
And
signature.
also in carbon fiber, it was trickle down, all the technology all trickled down and it trickled into Formula One, carbon fiber
Hmm.
disc brakes where they couldn't do it back then because it was there's all different kinds of carbon fiber now. There's grades of carbon fiber that are so prohibitively expensive that are only used, in NASA applications and things like that. And probably it's some of it is probably even classified.
Hmm.
But the carbon fiber that would probably be ideal for a drum shell now is a lot different than what's used on the carbon drum. Mine is woven. It's a woven, it comes in sheets because carbon fiber is literally that. It's like a hair strand. And now there's nanotube, which are hollow. I mean, the technology since then, and it would probably be a UD carbon, which is uh, unilateral design UD, which is it looks like marble when you look at it. It runs in all different directions. The kind of carbon fiber that they use in monocoque bicycle frames is different than the kind of carbon fiber that they'll use in a tube-to-tube structured frame. So there's a lot of different types of carbon fiber based on the goals. And they could come up design a carbon fiber that's specific to a drum shell for resonance, for sustain. It'd be endless. And it could be molded in a like some bicycle frames are molded. Other tubes are woven around a mandrel, and there's a number of different ways it could be manufactured to make it really, really specific to a drum, what the characteristics you'd want in a perfect drum shell. And I'm sure at some point somebody will probably do that. You could even mold it in a way where the lugs are molded into the shell, where it wouldn't be a separate piece, and just the threaded part would be co-molded into the shell where you can insert the threaded part. It's tough to thread the carbon because it won't hold a thread. But
Hmm.
there's forged carbon now that's much strong. There's just so many. Uh, the leaps and bounds in carbon technology are more than significant since they made the shells for my. But my kit, that carbon kit sounds amazing. So and then you have composite shells like plexiglass shells, like Vistalite and things like that, which those drums sound pretty good. So there's probably something down the pike, for really incredible sounding carbon fiber drum kit that would be incredibly light. If you look at an aluminum shelled snare drum,
Hmm.
it's a you know it's non-ferrous. Aluminum is non-ferrous, and it's incredibly light. I use one in Denver. I have one. I just haven't used it much. I'm going to start using it. The snare drum that I played in Denver. I mean, it's just crazy loud. You could make a carbon fiber shell equivalently thin, and the bearing edge would be equivalently as durable as an aluminum or a metal snare drum. But you could make
Hmm.
the bearing edge much even sharper, because of the attributes of carbon fiber. You can make it light and it wouldn't warp under the pressure, or the tension, and all kinds of things. So I'm sure somebody will do that at some point, but it'll take some money. But
Yeah.
hey, there are people that are paying crazy amounts of money for used kits of mine, so I know I can imagine what they'd pay for a full-on state-of-the-art carbon fiber kit. Plus, it'd be so beautiful.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That set you played was beautiful. It was amazing. It sounded great.
Still is. They're in my locker, not far from here. Yeah.
What's the address?
Yeah.
Oh, so now moving along to your website. So there's been a lot of speculation. You put out a press release a while ago saying, "Hey, you're developing something that's coming along," and some people were speculating you're going to be offering more lessons on the website. Is that something you're going to possibly do?
Well, I don't think I really know enough to teach anybody anything. I tried that once at a friend's drum shop a long, long time ago, just kind of on the down low, and because I didn't come up in a curriculum-based program, it's hard for me to teach in a curriculum-based program. And the stuff that I do there's no rocket science going on. It's like anything else related to drums. You learn the rudiments, you learn them really slow. That's the best way to learn them because that's where the speed comes from. You get them clean slow, it's actually easier to play them fast. You know,
Okay.
cleaner,
Mhm.
you really, and you learn them slow over a long period of time and rehearse them for ridiculous, incredibly, incessantly boring, provokingly boring amounts of time, and there's no shortcut to that. No, I have some plans. I just got bogged down trying to get my aspiration, my first bucket list item was to get my home studio up to where I could do world class stems in there. When people send me, I get a lot of offers to do remote recording instead of going and going setting up in a drum room, with a real high ceiling and stuff. And I'm trying to be self-contained in that, where my drum room, I'm trying to update it where I can record in there because all they want all flat stems. They don't want any patches or any crap on it. And so you have to have a good room. You have to and you have to know what you're doing. You have to have good software and good hardware. And I have all the hardware and stuff. Just trying to get my room together. So that was my first bucket list. And then once I accomplished the sound part, I was going to integrate the video part and just get in there and jam around, do some impromptu stuff with folks. I haven't added any content yet because I've just been so busy otherwise, and I want it to sound and look really, really good. Trying to learn to be an engineer overnight, a sound engineer and a video engineer because I want to be self-contained. I want to sit on my stool, push record, and start playing, and then go
Mhm.
back and do some editing. So I have to have editing software, and you just don't wake up being a video editor, And I didn't
Yeah.
pay any attention to the recording engineers when I was growing up. I just wanted to go out there and play and record. I didn't sit behind the console seeing how the guy was EQ and stuff, and I should have, those are opportunities that I squandered, and so my wife says, well, you play, you don't have to worry about. Well, I want to do all of it, but I'm gonna have to get somebody in to kind of get me up on the learning curve, so I can get it going sooner than later. And I'd like to invite some drum friends of mine, set up a bunch of my kits in a friend's tasting room around here, and have my friends jam and video it, and stream stuff like that, But
That'd be fantastic.
I've got a lot of ideas. I just the reality of it is so much more complex.
Yeah, of course. But we
Yeah.
gotta. You have to add a store to your website because see, I got all these drum heads I got back here. I got to get a Tommy Aldridge signed drum head.
Oh, sure, we can take care of that. That's no problem. It'll take a lot less time and energy than pulling off this Zoom interview. I'll promise you that.
I guess my final question is, how have you been able to keep your energy up, and what advice would you give to players right now who want to keep the energy up when they're playing the drums if they don't, if they're getting older? I'm over 50, and
Sure.
it's just changed a lot.
Yeah. How do I address the aging issue?
Yes.
Well, if I would have chosen a different genre of music, I wouldn't have to be addressing that, would I? But it's live by the sword, die by the sword. I don't get calls, for laid back groove, kind of stuff. I get called for in your face. So if I'm going to be in your face, I don't want to, embarrass myself. I do my level best to keep myself fit. I try not to do things that are abusive to my body. I spend a lot of time in my drum room. I try to be prepared before I go to rehearse in LA, or if there's a clinic thing coming up. Clinics are particularly stressful because it's like spoke about of earlier. You don't have a band around you, and the camaraderie of that. And you kind of support yourself on stage, and it's really true. You're only good as the people you're working with, and when you're working with people that are better than you, they lift you up to their level, and so you come off that, and you're kind of going into battle with the troops. In a clinic situation, every eye in the place is on you. You have your laptop or your iPad or your iPhone, whatever you're playing to, and if you drop a note, you can't, there's nowhere else you can blame it on. So you're out there up close and personal in front of God and everybody. And for the most part, they want to see and hear something that they're not going to hear and see going down the road, down at their local, whatever. So that's challenging. And in many cases, like a gentleman the other night asked me, could you play Heat in the Street by Travers? And I couldn't remember the tune. And it's not that I don't know the song. I mean, if Pat would have been, if he'd have started the riff, it would just kicked in.
Mhm.
But not having, again, a fellow bandmate, to collaborate with, it would have just kicked in, and because there's a lot of time changes in it and stuff, and it's a great song, a very dramatic song, and to play, and I was really blessed to be a part of it, and I love the song. Actually, I think I did a version of it for Dromeo that they haven't yet put out. Hope maybe they will.
Okay.
A lot of people requested it, but it was a little embarrassing for me, you know. So know all the material. Go in your drum room. If you're going out and playing an hour and a half show, approach the show. I approach the show like one song, and I get used to the transition. So when I get close to the vamp of the last tune, it kind of triggers the muscle memory and everything else that leads into the next tune. So there's some continuity there, and there's some flow there. In my genre of music, the flow isn't sometimes as much from bar to bar as it is from song to song, you know. And when you're playing two bass drums and you kind of have an athletic style of playing, it's very much like a racehorse, a thoroughbred racehorse. When they're at full speed, they never have more than one hoof on the floor, on the ground at a time. If you're playing two bass drums, which everyone seems to be, and his third cousin's cross-dressing uncle seems to be a bass drum, double bass drummer these days, you never have more than one foot on the ground at a time. That means you don't have that hi-hat foot that's planted. So you have to have some headroom in your fitness, so you have all that stuff going on. You never have to think about the engine, only think about the musical aspect of it. And if you go in your drum room, count the show off just like you're doing a play at the same intensity. If you have to put 2 or 3 fans in there, video it, you know, so you have the visual stuff. You're trying to integrate that into it. Find the spots where you can do that. That takes a lot more effort than just sitting back there playing. And people leave the rehearsal room and they get on stage and they fall apart after the second song. It's because the adrenaline kicks in, and all of a sudden you may have started a little bit quicker than you should have, and you painted yourself in a corner real quick. Because when you start playing from up here as opposed to here, it's a whole nother ball game, you know. So you want to prepare yourself for any eventuality. You don't want to cramp up, you know. These are things that drummers of other genres of music may not have to consider. But if you want to survive in the world of in-your-face rock, you got to have some stamina. You got to have some. You have to have some headroom in your playing that allows that. So that's what I do. I go in my drum. I come out wringing wet, just like I would if I was coming off stage. One other quick thing is having a little kit backstage. Out on the road, I'll have my little hip gig kits backstage rather than just a practice pad, because, you know, a practice pad doesn't help me much with this, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Helps me with my fingers and my hands and wrists, sure, definitely, in practice pad. But I have a little drum kit back there, and I jump on them, and, you know, I try to be warm and ready for the downbeat. You don't get to get 2 or 3 tunes to warm up. It's not like YouTube where you can do edit after edit after edit after edit, or like Pro Tools where you can do edit after edit and sound like God on drums. When people are standing in front of you and that beat goes by or that measure goes by, you can't get it back. So do it till you can't do it wrong. Rehearse it till you can't play it wrong. The muscle memory, you got the calluses, it's already, you're ready to rock. No shortcut to awesome. There just isn't one. Believe me, I would have found it if there by now. If there was one. And so that's what I do. And I do the things that make me tired. I do those the most. That way, when I go to do them in front, when I'm out there and you have to do it smooth, it has to sound like a machine. You're bulletproof, man. You're bulletproof. Yeah. Take care of yourself. Stay off the drugs, man. That's a full-time job. Drumming's pros. Being a pro drummer is full-time. Take care of yourself, you know. Have a good family. Pray. Pray a lot. Pray a lot. If not for Jesus, I'd be dead in the water 25 years ago. You think I'm responsible for any of this? I only take credit for the bad notes. The rest, glory goes somewhere else, let me tell you.
Thank you so much. You take care.
Bless you, Paul. I'll talk to you in the future.
All right.
All right. Bye-bye.
This has been a production of the Drumming News Network. All rights reserved. All media is owned by the respective parties. This episode cannot be distributed or copied in any form. Please visit drummingNewsNetwork.com daily to keep up on all the latest drumming news.